Hey guys, you are on the most mystical channel, Mr. Creepy Depp. Today I'm going to tell you 3 true very scary Halloween stories. Huge request, subscribe to my channel and put a like under this video. This will give me the opportunity to tell longer stories for you. Thank you all for your support and enjoy watching. If there is one thing you should know about me, it's that I have always loved Halloween. The flickering jack-o'-lanterns, the blend of spooky decorations, the rustling autumn leaves underfoot. There's a peculiar charm to it all. So when I received an invitation to an extravagant Halloween party at the old Rookwood mansion on the outskirts of town, I was thrilled and definitely not going to miss it. The weather on Halloween night was perfect, a clear, dark sky with a large, glowing moon. As I parked my car on the gravel driveway of the mansion, an eeriness washed over me. The mansion, looming up against the moonlit horizon, was a sight to behold. Its stone gargoyles seemed to glower under the ominous, flickering orange lights. Once inside, the party was already in full swing. People were dressed in all sorts of costumes, from classic witches and vampires to movie characters and everything in between. The mansion's grand hall was spectacular, draped in faux spider webs and lit by candelabras. A sense of excitement filled me as I joined the crowd. It was during a rather peculiar game of hide-and-seek across the mansion that I felt an unusual draft. It led me to a small hidden room tucked away behind a bookshelf in the mansion's grand library. Shrouded in shadows, it seemed as if it hadn't been disturbed for years. Diaries, old documents, and dust-laden artifacts were haphazardly scattered all over. Out of curiosity, I picked up what looked like a worn-out diary. As I perused the age-worn inscriptions, a sense of terror took hold of me. The words on the page seemed to be transforming, triggering a sudden wave of dizziness in me. The diary dropped from my hands, landing face down on the wooden floor. As my vision cleared, I looked around and panicked. How could this be? I was no longer in the small hidden room. Instead, I found myself standing in what looked like the grand hall, though grossly distorted. The laughter and jovial Halloween celebrations had vanished, replaced by a spectral, silent misery, and the once lively party guests had turned into ethereal figures, each one more macabre than the next. In a panic, I scrambled for the diary on the floor, hoping to find an explanation for what was happening. As I picked it up, a loose piece of paper fell out, bearing only one sentence. "Whosoever reads this diary on a Halloween night are bound to relive the nights eternally." I was trapped in a lost echo of time, a spectral loop, a horrific Halloween nightmare. Just then, one of the ghostly figures turned to face me, its ghastly features contorting into an eerie smile. Its mouth moved, and although no sound came out, I heard the whisper in my head, "Join the celebration. Become one of us." Frightened, I ran, but no matter how hard I tried to find the exit, I kept ending up in the grand hall, encircled by the spectral guests. As the clock struck midnight, they all turned to look at me, their ghostly eyes gleaming in the dim light. I felt my strength drain away as I collapsed, the last sight being the hauntingly beautiful ceiling of the hall before the darkness swallowed me up. Regaining consciousness, I found myself still lying in the grand ballroom. The ghostly inhabitants had returned to their reverie, continuing the eternally repeating spectacle. I clutched the diary in my hand, my mind racing, desperate for a way out of this spectral nightmare. As I thumbed through the diary again, I noticed something I hadn't seen previously, a symbol etched into the leather at the back. It looked like an intricate seal or sigil, celestial and earthly elements combined. Running my fingers over the raised leather patterning, I remembered the note. "Whosoever reads this diary on a Halloween night are bound to relive the nights eternally." Hope surged in my heart. What if the binding could be reversed? The seal aroused a thought in me. Could this celebration end at dawn, when Halloween was officially over? Leaning on a grandiose, gilt-edged chair for support, I reached for the antique clock by the rustic fireplace. The hands on the clock were frozen at midnight. In a desperate attempt, I turned the minute hand until the clock chimed the hour, 1 o'clock. The spectral crowd faltered, their movements and actions sluggish. Heartened, I kept advancing the clock, each hour making the spectral guests more and more transparent, their ghostly whispers growing fainter. As I turned it to dawn's hour, a feeble ray of sunlight pierced through the grand window of the hall. The room was filled with an aurora-like glow, the spectral guests shimmering. And then, just as the first ray of dawn hit the antique clock, they burst into hundreds of shimmering particles, creating a specter of colors. With each passing second, they dissolved further, their forms dispersing in an iridescent rain of light until they vanished completely. I was left alone in the grand hall. As the reality of my situation hit me, my knees buckled and thumped against the wooden floor. Saved by daylight and time, rescued from a never-ending nightmare. Returning to the library, I discovered the hidden room just as disused and forgotten. But something was different. The diary was no longer a tome of archaic leather and parchment, but a simple, mundane book, stripped of its supernatural aura. Feeling as though I had been trapped for years, I stumbled out of the mansion, greeted by the brisk morning air. The hollow silence was replaced with the tranquil chirping of the early birds. As I drove home, the mansion loomed large in my rear-view mirror, ominous yet somehow less threatening, the first light of day dancing off its weathered stone walls. That night left me with a story I dare not speak aloud, my Halloween fervor replaced with a quiet caution for the uncanny. Because now I know, when the line between our world and the other blurs on All Hallows Eve, one must tread carefully lest they get caught up in the endless dance of the spectral celebration. It was Halloween night. The full moon hung in the sky like a haunting specter, casting eerie shadows on the world below. My old group of friends, crowded into our nostalgic childhood treehouse, decided to reignite a tradition we had grown too old for years ago, telling spooky stories. Any fears we held were veiled behind nostalgia and the familiar comfort of each other's company. Huddled around in the dim glow of vintage lanterns, with the bite of the wind whispering against the wooden sides of the treehouse, we began to spin our tales. Stories ranged from the comedic groaners about bedsheet ghosts to more eerie tales of ghouls lurking in the dark, waiting to strike. Something strange had been bubbling away in my subconscious for a while, a story not entirely my own, but it was my turn to scare. I let the quiet hang in the air, letting their anticipation build before starting with a low, hushed whisper, "Do you remember Old Man Travers?" Everyone seemed to stiffen. That name held a kind of uneasiness none could put their finger on. Old Man Travers was an eccentric recluse who had lived on the outskirts of our town. His house was decrepit and foreboding, surrounded by gnarled ancient trees that stood as silent sentinels. His death 5 years ago remained wrapped in mystery. "That's right," I continued, peering into their eyes. "We all suspected his house was haunted. What we didn't know was that he was trying to protect us from what lived within it." I recounted a fabricated tale of a vengeful spirit trapped in his house, torturing the old man who had to keep it at bay, the one who had inadvertently bound it to the material world when he delved too deeply into arcane knowledge. When he died, the spirit was unleashed, free to roam our town under the cover of darkness. I saw my friends' eyes widening, their breath drawing uneasy and shallow as the wind outside the treehouse picked up, moaning through the trees like some tortured soul. Within the story's climax, a gust of wind suddenly extinguished our lanterns. Darkness swallowed the treehouse. It wasn't supposed to be a part of my tale, but I couldn't have planned a better time for it. There in the black void, I whispered a final eerily timed rhetorical question. What if that spirit is in with us right now? A deafening silence fell over us. I could hear the sharp intakes of breath, the rustling of nervous movement. Just when the silence became unbearable, a low, throaty laugh echoed out beside us. Terrified screams pierced the night, and we scrambled out of the treehouse in panic, tripping over each other in the treehouse steps. Once we were all safe on the ground, the source of the laughter was revealed. Sam, the ever-prankster of our group, was doubled over in apparent humor at our expense. The scare, though unintended, had been the perfect end to what felt like our last true Halloween together. Yes, the essence of fear is sometimes enough with good friends, even whenever they make you the victim of a well-timed wind gust, a conveniently placed prank, or a spooky story. But the night was not over. The hour was late and one story was left to tell. One I didn't have the heart to tell them yet. A real story involving Old Man Travers's spirit. Not tonight. Perhaps another Halloween. Underneath our laughter and good-natured teasing of Sam, I felt a palpable sense of unease. My story had been just that, a story. But there was another facet to Old Man Travers's tale, one that was neither imagined nor embellished. It was a story I had discovered years ago and had always kept hidden out of fear, out of disbelief. After our laughter died down and our minds began to settle, I seized the moment. All right, guys. I've got an actual story about Old Man Travers now, and I swear, this one is real. The levity of the moment drained away, replaced again with trepidation. They peered at me, their eyes showing a mixture of curiosity and reluctance. I took a deep breath and began. A year after Old Man Travers' death, I had chanced upon a grimoire, or a book of magic, in the town's antique bookstore. It had belonged to Travers. It was filled with his elaborate notes, his frantic scribbles trying to understand and control something he had unleashed. He talked about a ritual gone wrong, one he had attempted to reconcile with a lost love. Instead of summoning her spirit as planned, he had opened a door to something else, dark and hateful. He made it his life's mission to contain it, fearful of what it might do if unleashed. His notes implied the spirit was bound to remain within his property unless attached to a person who had read and understood the core ritual from the grimoire. After uncovering this story, I had immediately returned the book, fearful of becoming the next keeper. But even with the book out of my possession, a lingering worry began to gnaw at me. What if merely reading the grimoire was enough to pass the spectral baton? What if I was now the one keeping the spirit at bay? Silence followed as I concluded my tale. Then, slowly, the hollow sound of laughter began, nervous at first, then gradually increasing in pitch and volume. They started calling the story a good one, a well-woven tale, nothing more. Internally, I was relieved. I didn't want them losing sleep over this. Yet, as we left the treehouse and began to disperse, I couldn't shake off a sense of impending doom. There was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the October breeze, and for a split second I thought I saw a shadowy figure darting away in the corner of my vision. Was it my imagination fueled by the grimoire story, or was it something else? Closing my front door behind me, I knew one thing. That grimoire was still in the bookstore, under a thick layer of dust, waiting for the next unsuspecting reader to turn its pages. And as I stepped into my house, the once comforting home suddenly seemed cold, unknown. My eyes darted around the room, half expecting to see a formless shadow. And in the silence of my home, I could have sworn I heard a whisper, a low, throaty laugh, much like Sam's, but with a slightly creepy undertone. My heart pounded in my chest as I locked the door and activated every single light in the house, hoping against all odds that I was merely spooked by my own storytelling. For better or worse, life in our quiet town was bound by stories, the tales we tell each other. The real horror, well, that was something we'd have to face in the darkest corners of our homes, forever questioning. Was that story just a tale, or had we invited something sinister into our lives? Only time would tell. I've always been charmed by Halloween, enamored by the eerie adornments, imaginative disguises, and the irresistible prospect of gratuitous candy. However, during the distinctive Halloween of 2023, I recall how that affection intertwined with an anonymous sense of dread. It all started right after sunset. My friends and I, draped in our creative attires, were eager to carry out our tradition of trick-or-treating. As we trotted down Maple Street, our outrageous laughter filled the autumn air. Our bags were satisfyingly brimming with all types of candy, but greed, or rather the spirit of adventure, propelled us to explore a little farther from our usual path. Nostalgia whispered tales of Old Man Hutchison's house, a place we used to dare each other to knock on when we were younger. So, for old times' sake, we decided to take a detour down the ominous Woodcut Lane. The streetlights were strangely dim on Woodcut Lane, and the houses were far between, the exact kind of place parents caution their children to avoid. But it was Halloween, and we felt invincible in the face of any lurking terrors. There it was, Old Man Hutchison's house, long forsaken and decidedly creepy with the desolation, monstrous trees dwarfing the roof, and windows reflecting ghostly moonlight. There were no Halloween decorations, but it didn't need any. It was naturally scary. With a sinking feeling, I approached the house. Swallowing a lump of fear, I mirrored my friend's bravado and led the charge up the creaking porch stairs. Knocking on the ancient wooden door, we waited. No answer. We waited a bit more. Still no answer. Just as we decided to leave, a weird thing happened. The door eerily swung open, revealing the void behind it. Simultaneously excited and terrified, we dared each other to step inside. The inner nerve-wracking darkness was broken by a faint flickering light showcasing an antique mirror reflecting the candy lying confiscated on an old table. The candy was neatly wrapped, subtly shimmering, but there was something odd about it. Unnaturally colorful, each piece seemed to carry an uncanny aura. But ignoring that intuitive caution, we decided to pick it up. After all, it was free candy. As I reached out to the pile of candy, a sudden whisper swept into my ear. It was a low, dry, daunting voice, too hushed to be audible, but loud enough to be felt. At first it sounded like gibberish, but slowly I deciphered a repeating, "Don't." Ignoring the whisper, I collected the candy, thinking it was just my brain playing tricks due to the spooky atmosphere. But the moment my hand touched the candy, the room's temperature seemingly dropped. The air appeared denser, and I felt as if 1,000 invisible eyes were now watching me. The laughter echoed in the halls once again, this time closely followed by shrill screams. We ran out of there so incredibly fast our fear-fueled pavement pounding drowned only by the sound of our own hyperventilation. We flung the gates open, every one of us bolting like frightened rabbits down the shadowy woodcut lane. When we finally stopped running, I noticed that the candy from Old Man Hutchison's house was glowing even more vividly. And on closer look, the candy wrappers seemed to contort, shifting shapes, forming horrendous faces that seemed to be screaming in silent agony. Suddenly, I didn't want any candy anymore, definitely not this one. Still panting from the run, I decided to rationalize what we had just experienced. It was Halloween. We were meant to be scared. Wasn't that the fun of this holiday? I mustered a dry chuckle, showing the bag of candy to my friends. They laughed uneasily, and we collectively decided to forget the strange incident. I returned home with a mixed bag of feelings. Dumping my loot on my bed, the glowing candy from Old Man Hutchison's house stood out ominously. Getting the persistent "don't" out of my mind became a Herculean task. Reason suggested it was only a figment of my overly imaginative brain, and yet I knew by some primal instinct that it was more than just that. Curious, or perhaps more so foolish, I decided to unwrap one of the candies. As the wrapper fell open to the floor, the room darkened. The walls seemed to possibly pulsate as the wind howled mournfully outside. I held a small blood-red candy in my hand. As I raised it to my mouth, the low whisper returned, this time louder, pleading, "Don't." Ignoring the voice, or perhaps defying it, I opened my mouth and dropped the candy in. The second it touched my tongue, a surge of fleeting images assaulted my senses. I saw faces warped in terror, heard their silent screams. There were ominous shadows half hidden in corners, gnarly fingers reaching out from walls, and eyes. A multitude of eyes watching my every move with rancor visible in their depth. I snapped out of the trance, the candy still in my mouth. I immediately spat it out and scrubbed my tongue, trying to purge myself of the repelling sensations. It was as if that candy had transported me into a different reality, a haunting reality which was now slowly invading our world. The panic gripped me then, a sobering realization that we had perhaps disturbed something paranormal we weren't supposed to ever find. Masked as candies, these were entities, souls, or cursed remnants which were now unleashed. The world around me felt different. An unseen layer of reality had been unveiled to my eyes ever since I tasted that wretched candy. The Halloween night that began in pursuit of thrills was culminating into an eerie story that I would probably hold on to forever. The phrase trick or treat took on a different, darker meaning, making me reel at the thought of the unsuspected nightmares hidden behind the festivities' alluring mask. That night I came to the realization that staying away from some houses, and especially certain candy, is often the best course of action. Also, I discovered that the spectral charm of Halloween encompasses far more than simply donning costumes and gathering candy. From that Halloween on, I've never looked at a single piece of candy the same way again. The tale of terror is something I will carry with me forever, a grim reminder of a night when fun, fear, and candy blended to unleash an unspeakable nightmare. That's all for today. I hope my stories made an impression on you. If so, don't forget to put a like under this video and subscribe to the channel. In the next videos, you are waiting for the most mystical stories from around the world. Do not miss. See you in the new video.